Well, good morning. It is Friday, the 19th of November, and we have gathered for a morning devotion. And this one is called Presence, Part 1, from Mark chapter 2, verses 23 and 24. On the Sabbath, Jesus was going to the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?" So Law 101. It actually was not unlawful to pluck a head of grain on the Sabbath. God commanded his people to rest every seventh day, and Moses specified that no fire be lit in its observance, so the Jews prepared their Sabbath food ahead of time. There was also ceremonial law that prohibited stuff, all of which fell into three main categories: no food prep, no making clothes or leather, and no building things. But no plucking? That wasn't on the list. Leave it to the religious leaders to require more of the people than God did, at the expense of the law's purpose. God wanted the Jews to rest because they spent their days doing physical labor, and the days were never done, for goodness sake. They walked in the desert for 40 years, pulling their homes from behind them. So the required rest wasn't for his sake, but for theirs. Just as parents force exhausted little ones to take naps. Now back to the story. And Jesus said to them, "Have you ever read what David did when he was in need and was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and ate the bread of presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him." History 101. In Old Testament times, the house of God, known as the tabernacle, was a place where God dwelt in the form of a cloud or a pillar of fire. Besides his presence, there are a few other things in the tent's two rooms. First, a gold lampstand made of solid gold and weighed about 75 pounds, 6 arms, think like a candelabra or menorah type thing, with multiple lamps that burned continuously as the only source of light. Next, on the altar of incense, made from acacia wood, covered with gold and standing 3 feet high, a special concoction burned twice a day. And finally, a small ornate table, also made from acacia wood and covered with gold, sat opposite the lampstand. On it, the priest put 12 loaves of bread, think like flatbread type thing, matzah if you will. The loaves were baked fresh and placed each week, acknowledging God's constant presence with the Israelites, hence the name Bread of Presence. All that to say that the daily ritual of lighting fires, burning incense, and baking bread were done to honor God's presence, because he was in the room. Despite God's great favor toward David and his resulting victories in the battlefield, the guys could be a piece of work. He often let physical urges dictate his behavior, and his particular incident was no different. David was on King Saul's most wanted list, and he was tired and hungry and on the run. So he racked up 3 violations. First, David entered the house of God, a place where only priests were allowed to go. Second, David lied to the priest, telling him that he was on a secret mission from Saul. And third, David all but demanded to eat the bread of presence, food only priests were allowed to eat. Ironically, the rule-observing Pharisees held David in the highest possible regard. But this new guy and his disciples were their head of grain plucking. How dare they? As would become his habit, Jesus exposed the hypocrisy of their disgust and redirected the conversation to something far more disturbing. And so the story is to be continued. Our prayer focus. Ask God to reveal to you where you value rules over relationship. And now moving forward, questions. With all this pomp and circumstance, do you find talk of the tabernacle interesting or boring? And why? Imagine the room where God's presence dwelled. Imagine approaching the cloud and the pillar of fire. How would standing in his presence in this warm and quiet place affect the way you view the requirements of the law? Now imagine walking with Jesus. Imagine the unrestricted access, the casual conversation, the warmth of his presence. That's all. Just imagine.